And I think we can just go ahead and get started with introductions. And I will say first a little disclaimer that I do have a 9-week-old daughter downstairs who is crying at the moment. So I do apologize if anybody ends up being able to hear it. Hopefully it's pretty muted. But she is loud, so she may carry through. So if you do ever hear that, please you know that there is a guardian watching her at this juncture, so do not worry. But I do just want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. My name is Sam Futrell. I am a master teacher at the William and Mary Learning and Design Lab, and I am the president of the Virginia Council for the Social Studies. And I'm really excited that we are in our third iteration of this webinar series on the Williamsburg Bray School. We have been working together for a few months now. I think it was at the American Historical Association's conference that we met Maureen. Yeah. And we were
Yeah.
able to connect. And, she was just telling me about the incredible work that they have been doing at the Bray School Lab. And I immediately jumped on it because I just thought it was just so intriguing and rich, and just something that Virginia teachers should be and can be bringing into their classrooms. And so I'm really excited that they've partnered with VCSS for this series. And I will say, ahead of starting everything tonight, that if you haven't checked out the other two webinars in this series, we are going to post these on the VCSS website. So we encourage you to go back. The first webinar was really an incredibly strong foundational webinar on what the Bray School was and what the Bray School Lab does now, and how the Williamsburg Bray School really was pivotal for the education of free and enslaved Black children in the 1700s. And so the second webinar in the series was geared more toward elementary educators. And so if you know any elementary educators who would be interested in this history, and some really practical ways that they could bring this local history into the classroom, we really encourage you to send them over to that webinar as well. And all of these will be live on the VCS's website. Um, Hopefully no later than the next couple weeks from now, which is September 16th. So by the end of September, we're hoping to get those launched. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my co-hosts here and really the drivers of our show tonight. Maureen Elgersman Lee, who is the director of the Williamsburg Bray School Lab, and Elizabeth Drimbus, who is the Bray School Lab's genealogist. Welcome, Maureen and Elizabeth.
Hey, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Hey, good evening, everyone. And we're going to jump right into talking about bringing the Williamsburg Bray School into the secondary social studies classroom. So again, my name is Maureen Elgersman Lee. I serve as director of the William and Mary Bray School Lab. You see our email address at the top and also a telephone number if you need to reach out to us. And my colleague Elizabeth Trumbus, wonderful colleague Elizabeth Trumbus, will introduce herself as well.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome. As Sam mentioned, I'm the genealogist. My task is to look at the students who attended the Williamsburg Bray School and search for descendants and to make those connections from the past to the present. So I'm happy you're all here this evening.
Great. Right. So just to again remind you who we are the William and Mary Bray School Lab. The lab was established in 2021 under the Williamsburg Bray School Initiative, which is a partnership between William and Mary and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Our mission to uncover, study, preserve, and share broadly in forums like this and others, the history and legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School, a school that operated from 1760 to 1774. And of course, that our mission covers not just the school, but its students. And we operate out of the Office of Strategic Cultural Partnerships, where we are highly collaborative in practice and collaborative in philosophy. We are going to do a brief refresher. Again, as Sam said, there are previous iterations of this series. Particularly the first gives you a more in-depth treatment of the history of the Williamsburg Bray School and the work of the lab. But we'll do a quick refresh for those who are on the workshop tonight for the first time. Then we're going to move right into SOLs for Virginia and U.S. history. This is a lot more theoretical than the elementary. So the conversation and the lessons look a little bit different. And of course, always we are working in collaboration and we invite thoughts about how some of these ideas might be refined or also what other opportunities there are to bring this content into the classroom.
All right, so welcome everyone. So we're talking about the Williamsburg Bray School, and it was a school that was established in Williamsburg. It was one of five known charity schools in the British colonies, and the one in Williamsburg opened in 1760 and closed in 1774. So we're talking about that period well before and then right up against the American Revolutionary War. And it is, and we make no bones about it, that this was a pro-slavery school designed to teach enslaved children to accept and be content in what was considered their ordained place in the colonial society. It was funded by the associates of Dr. Reverend Thomas Bray. He was an Anglican priest, and it was his associates after his death that they created this charity based in London, and then they would be in correspondence with a local trustee. And so the records of that correspondence between the associates in London and the trustees locally, and particularly one trustee was the longest serving trustee in Williamsburg. It's that correspondence where we get all of the primary source documents for what we know about the school. The school employed one teacher, Ann Wager, through the entire 14 years of its existence. There was evidence that she taught approximately 300 to 400 children to read, to spell, to sew and knit for the girls, particularly over the course of that 14 years. It was not designed to encourage ideas of freedom or equality. But as we always talk about, once a child has knowledge, has education, has some skills, you're not going to be able to contain that spirit, and we're not going to be able to contain what they do with that knowledge and those skills. And so what we're interested in is, particularly in the lab, is looking at what that legacy was of that education. How did the students use that education, and what could we learn about their lived experiences? And as we go on to the next slide, we have to talk about, that was the idea, that was the endeavor of the school. We also have to talk about the actual structure of the building, because the building itself, the original building that housed the school for its first 5 years of existence, was discovered on the campus of William and Mary. It had been modified over time. Wings had been added to it, the roof line had been different. So it wasn't known until about 2020 for sure that that was the building. It was kind of encapsulated in all these additions, but it was through the science of dendrochronology, which was the dating of tree rings, that they went in, they took core samples, and they were able to determine that the wood of that building was cut down in the fall of 1759 and the winter of 1760. And we know that the school opened in September of 1760. Once the school was determined to be the original Bray School building, it was physically moved. It was picked up and moved from the William and Mary campus to the Colonial Williamsburg historic area. And it sits now at the corner of Nassau and Francis Streets, and it has been fully restored. And it's open to the public. And it opened on Juneteenth, and the admission is free. It's open from 10 in the morning until 5 o'clock each day, and there's no ticket required to go through the building to see the classrooms where the students would have been taught, and also out in the yard and learn a lot about the archaeology work that was done to determine really kind of what that material culture was, that the children's life, kind of what they were touching and what they were seeing each day. So. And so we in the lab, so we've talked a little bit about the endeavor of the Bray schools. We talked about the structure of the Bray school, and then we'll talk about the lab. The work of the lab, while to distinguish from the work that Colonial Williamsburg is doing, which is restoring and interpreting the building, we in the lab were really diving into what do we know about the students. Of the 14 years that the school is in existence, there are three known attendance lists or lists of students' names. And that gives us the names of about 87 students. And again, if we extrapolate from those lists, each year seemed to be between 25 to 30, even a little over 30 each year. That's how we get that number of 300 to 400 students. And so we take these lists, and for my work as a genealogist, I'm starting with these names of these children, and we're starting to see what happened to them after they were in the school and as they became adults and started to have their own families. And we've had our William and Mary students transcribe all of that correspondence between the trustees in Williamsburg and the Bray Associates in London. It really talks a lot about the Bray School's budget and the operations, as well as the students' progress. And from there, then we start to see what is known about the students, what is known about the school. So we have students working in the lab to do certain projects like transcription projects. We also have me doing the genealogy. We also had an oral historian who has interviewed is it over 40 people now? Um,
Yes.
then creating this oral history archive, and she's interviewed descendant community members who have deep ties to the Williamsburg area, William and Mary staff, Colonial Williamsburg staff, students who are involved in this work, scholars who have had some sort of research and touched on this Bray School project. So all of these transcriptions, all of the oral history recordings, all of this we put onto the William and Mary Bray School website and have it as available as possible and easily accessible to anyone who wants to learn more, use the assets on the website to create lesson plans or even just create their own projects. And so as we go on to the next slide, we talk about a couple of the digital story maps that our students came up with. And these are different assets that you can go through kind of a day in the life of two students, and it kind of weaves in the primary source documentation and current day things that, where things look on a map, as well as current research going on and even events in town with like the Hearth Memorial, and pictures of the Brafferton or the Wren building. And so we also have a story map that talks a little bit more deeply about the sewing and the knitting skills. We have a YouTube archive of our genealogical kind of Zoom sessions that we host every month called Bray School Stories. And so those are all free to access on YouTube. And I spend a little time each month kind of sharing out the research. Sometimes we'll have guest speakers come and speak about something about their family, or we had the historian from Colonial Williamsburg come and speak about the restoration efforts. We've had our William and Mary Bray School students who have done research in the lab. They've also been part of these Bray School Story Zoom sessions. So I recommend that you check them out. And also our blog. We have a blog where we have, again, our staff, scholars, our students, descending community members, really just kind of reflecting on how the Bray School story and how their involvement in any of the research projects, how they kind of feel about it and what they've learned about it and what they wanted to share on our blog. So lots of assets on the website. The address is right there. And I encourage you to take a look when you get a chance. So what do we got next? So any questions for the group? And we know that was really kind of fast and furious, but any questions at this point? Nothing?
No, I think that was perfect.
Okay.
Great,
Well,
quick overview.
okay, great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Maureen, to take it away for the next part.
So we want to move into the core of today's conversation, which is how do we take this information that Elizabeth has just laid out for us so well? Where are the opportunities to bring it into the classroom in line with the standards of learning? And really, how can we support teachers by making this information available, which we do? Where are the through lines? Where are the opportunities? So we're going to dive into that. If you were here for our last session, we had a different graphic. It was more of the yellow tape kind of caution, hard history, because we were dealing with hard history for young children with also young hearts and young minds. So this is a different student demographic, but the caution is still there and it's slightly different. That the caution is this is a busy road. This is dense material. We're dealing more with theoretical. So I couldn't resist the opportunity to put in a slightly different but related graphic just to kind of cue us up for what we're going to talk about in a moment. So again, this is not new to anyone, I think, with us this evening. But the Virginia and US history standards of learning have opportunities to engage the history of the Williamsburg Bray School. So I've just used the bold to highlight where I see connections. Chattel slavery, indentured servitude, forced labor, race-based enslavement, and persistence towards freedom uh, in a slave society. Very much those legacies of slavery that are seen in the history of the Williamsburg Bray School and its students. So again, some key terms, we want to make sure that we're being clear about the terms that we're going to be talking about today. So chattel slavery is that assigning of the legal status of chattel, which is personal movable property. That is chattel, personal movable property, assigning that legal status to human beings and also exercising that right of property in all aspects of life and commerce. So someone who is enslaved as chattel, it is that status, but it's also the enslaver's ability to exercise a right of property in all aspects of that person's life, um, including to sell them to someone else as chattel. Racial perpetual slavery, again, assigning that chattel to a specific population and creating a system in which that status is passed from generation to generation. This calls into play or calls into remembrance, if you will, the really significant Virginia 1662 law that essentially says the principle is that the child follows the condition of the mother, that it's the status of the mother that determines the status of the child as to whether that child is free or enslaved. By creating this perpetual system, you get a system that is assigned to a specific racial population, and then through reproduction, it just passes seamlessly from mother to child. Other important key terms, which probably are a little more intuitive. So the question of a pass, what is a pass in this context? That would be a note written by enslaver. In the absence of enslaver, it could be an overseer, but essentially it's a written document, a written note that allows an enslaved person to pass, that is to move about between particularly one place, typically their place of enslavement, in another place for a specific purpose and typically for a specific amount of time. It was not a blank slate. It was not boundless. There were specific boundaries to that. And the person carrying the pass would have to make sure that they were staying within the bounds of what that pass allowed them to do. And slave patrols are considered a form of early American policing. So men on horseback, patrolling roads, the edges of properties, other open spaces to monitor the movement of enslaved persons, prevent escape and revolts, and also to capture runaways. So they were very much the safety net in a slave society that was designed to make sure that as people were moving about, enslaved persons were moving about, they stayed within the confines of their property in which they were tied to, or if they moved about, that they had this pass. And that was designed to keep control, right? Slavery was about control and maintaining control as much as possible. So what I want to focus on is the Virginia U.S. History Standard 8, A, explaining how slavery is the antithesis of freedom. And this is an opportunity to move into some of the more theoretical work from my past experience, particularly teaching American social history, which I really enjoy, and also intellectual history. But I want to talk a minute about Eric Foner. This may be a text that teachers are already using. If not, I really encourage this to be at least a consideration because Eric Foner presents a formula for talking about what are the prerequisites of freedom? How do you know that you are free? And he identifies two prerequisites: property rights in oneself. So you own yourself. No one has property rights in you. And secondly, the ability to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Those two are prerequisites to freedom. They must exist at the same time in the same person to be able to talk about freedom. And the absence of those things would be therefore the absence of freedom. But very accessible but still elevated ideas that are appropriate to secondary social study classes. For the more visual learner, how might this be expressed, right? I love text, but for a visual learner, what might that look like in terms of understanding the difference? And it could be simply as a check mark, checking off property rights. Is that present? Yes. Enjoy the fruits of the labor? Yes. That meets Foner's prerequisites for freedom. If the answer to those questions are both no, then we are fundamentally talking about a condition of enslavement. And then what about indentured servitude? We can see indenture could be considered the intermediary between those two. Property rights in oneself, legally, yes, but do you have the ability to enjoy the fruits of your labor? Totally. No, because typically indenture was you were working for someone else to pay off a debt. Oftentimes, the debt encouraged for someone paying your passage from England to Virginia, for example. You are a free person, you are not enslaved, but the fruits of your labor are not yours until you've paid off your indenture. So for the visual learner, that can be helpful to understand the relationship between these terms and the prerequisites. We want to think about how to communicate these concepts to students in a way that identifies this and recognizes as a system, but also lends itself to thinking about freedom and slavery as lived experiences. So how does having property rights in oneself, what does that mean in one's day-to-day existence? And what does having the ability to enjoy the fruits of your labor mean in your day-to-day existence? And what does the absence of that mean? Because we're talking about this theoretically, but we're also talking about people who had this status. And just like we talk about the students, we want to talk about history in terms of human experience. So one possible example of assignment, it can be modified, it could be lengthened, but on a paper or computer, thought about this idea of just kind of labeling two columns, freedom and the absence of freedom, if you would, and taking this idea and asking students to use these glasses, if you would, to look at their own experiences and how freedom is enjoyed, even without really thinking about it, but then also thinking about what would that look like? What would those activities look like in the absence of freedom? So could ask the student to itemize 10 things that they've done in the past 3 days that they want to highlight, or even just a single day recently so that they can remember kind of the highlights. One might be woke up at 10 a.m. That's in the presence of freedom. You have the ability to determine that. In the absence of freedom, you would not be able to determine that. That is prescribed by your owner. And if you're enslaved, you are not waking up at 10 a.m. You're likely waking up before the sun is up because you need to be in the fields at sunrise. So just using that as an example, the other example about mobility, being able to move around freely at will, again, that would not be there. And again, in this case, a written pass, for example, might need to be coming to play to allow you to move from one place to another. So how do we take this theoretical, humanize it, and also make it relevant so that students can look at their own lives and see how this is operating? Questions, either about the prerequisites, about the assignment, does this make sense? And perhaps other ways that you can see to improve a possible exercise around these concepts.
The thing that I love about this assignment is that it allows students to theorize what, the absence of freedom might be like, right? We're not asking them to try to empathize or imagine their own enslavement, right? Like there's a difference between those
Mhm.
two things, because I think one is that line of like, a little bit inappropriate, and the other is just saying, what would limits on your own existence be like? And how would it be if those things were removed and if you did have those limits to constrain you? So I think that that's really important too. And I love this idea that, it's just looking at their day and how we have so much freedom and movement and choice. And I think that should feel really empowering to them as well. Like, and maybe kind of, I think I think even just the waking up, right? Mentioning that, that's really interesting to me to think about this morning. Like, like I woke up at this time and, I had a choice in that to some extent, right? And that's like something that I think we take for granted sometimes.
And it's the presence of freedom and the absence of freedom, right? And the great thing about these theories is that these theories can be applied to various populations at various times. It can be applied in terms of labor history. It can be applied in terms of women's history. So it's with the theories, right? They're not bound to a particular time in American history. They're not bound to a particular population. And these are, once you grasp these fundamental concepts, you can really do some really deeply critical thinking about American history more broadly. That's what I love about Foner. All right, any other questions before we move on? All right, I think we're good to go. And Elizabeth's going to talk about the persistence towards freedom.
Exactly. We um we wanted to pull this part from the standard because we have such a rich example in one of the Bray School students, and want to talk we could talk a lot. We could have an entire hour on Isaac B, quite frankly, but we're going to just narrow it down to a couple things that he did in his life that kind of exemplify this persisting toward freedom. And so if we go to the first slide, this is kind of an overview, a little bit of a timeline of Isaac B and his family that we worked up in the lab. We know that Isaac started and attended the Bray School in 1765. He is on that list, and he's on the list with the first and last name. So that makes it even a little bit easier to kind of to find him in the records. By 1774, he's no longer in Williamsburg, but he's in Mecklenburg County, Virginia, and he is enslaved by a man named Lewis Burwell. And we know this because in 1774, Isaac has decided that he's going to seek his freedom and leaves the plantation in Mecklenburg. And Lewis Burwell places an advertisement to get him back in the Virginia Gazette. We don't know exactly what happened or how, but we know that by 1782, Isaac B. is back in Mecklenburg County. He is at the Stoneland Plantation again with Lewis Burwell. And so we see him through the records. And then we know that by 1786, he is sold to a man by the name of David Lambert. And then in 1793, he is being sold again. And so this is just one of the assets that we have on the website, but I want to zero in on that 1793 time period. So we'll go to the next slide to really show what's going on. Um, February 6th, 1793. Isaac B. is named in a bill of sale, and this was found at the Library of Virginia on their website in Virginia Untold. And Isaac B. is being sold. Basically, what happened was that Richard Littlepage and Samuel McCraw had purchased Isaac together from a David Lambert. And at this point in February of 1793, Richard Littlepage is selling his share of Isaac to Samuel McCraw. Richard Littlepage refers to his right to Isaac B., that Isaac B. was previously the property of another man. And so that's where we start to see that, do you have the right to your own self? What is this is that absence of freedom that Maureen was referring to. And we see Isaac B. in the bill of sale. And Richard Littlepage is also selling some horses, and it's an entire bill of sale. He's just kind of selling property, and Isaac B. is considered part of that property. And what's great is that we know that Isaac has his own ideas. So if more you want to click that button, that Isaac B. has his own thoughts. And even in the 1774 ad, when Isaac B. was about 18 or 19 years old, even then, Lewis Burwell remarks that in the ad, he remarks that Isaac B. thinks he has a right to his freedom because his father is a free man. And this idea of thinks he has a right to his freedom is something we certainly see evidence that Isaac, we know, tried at least 2 times to seek his freedom, because on the next slide we see that almost exactly a month later, in March of 1793, Richard Littlepage posts an ad in the Virginia Gazette saying that Isaac has run away again. And at this point, we see he describes Isaac, and he describes the fact that he can read and write, and he may write himself a pass to be able to pass as a free man. The ad itself is really remarkable. The way that Isaac seeks his freedom is quite dramatic. He takes a horse with him. The horse has a saddle and saddlebags, and in the saddlebags are ledgers that belong to the sheriff and other miscellaneous papers. And this is talked about in the ad. Richard Littlepage even mentions the fact that there are 2 silver pistols in those silver bags, in the saddlebags that Isaac takes when he takes that horse. We always wonder whether this was planned or whether this was just a moment of opportunity and Isaac took it. And we don't really know beyond the 1793 ad whether Isaac made it to freedom or not. We are furiously looking and trying to ascertain what happened after this time period. 1793 is a pivotal time in Virginia. That was when the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, and so we know that things are going to start to change for people who seek their freedom, and if they are caught being returned. We also know that 1793 is when free people of color had to register in the courthouse. And so that's when we start to see a new primary source document, or documents that we use all the time in genealogy, are the free registers of free people of color. And so we think about this persisting towards freedom. Isaac B. absolutely exemplifies that. And he just didn't really want to give up. He saw an opportunity, tried it in 1774, tried it again in 1793. And so if we go to the next slide, we think about how would we incorporate Isaac's example into something that students nowadays might be able to kind of get their head wrapped around. And what do we know about that time period? And so the class challenge, either in individual or teams, we thought, well, what about could they list 10 specific obstacles to freedom that Isaac would have faced even after he escaped? You know, it's not some kind of Hollywood movie where he just kind of rides off into the sunset and the horse. There must have been obstacles that he faced along the way. And can we get the students to really think about what all would have had to go into the next steps after he's taken that horse? What happens next? What other obstacles does he have to get past? So I throw that out to the group tonight. If anybody wants to throw out some ideas that they would have for what Isaac might have faced while he was on the run with that horse. Any thoughts?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat.
Mhm.
Also, raise your hand if you'd like. Slave patrols, Laura said.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think he would also, I mean, it's not like life was necessarily easy for free Black individuals, you know? So even if he were to be able to convince people of his freedom, right?
Right.
Of his free status, I think that there would still be very difficult societal challenges in establishing a home and, acquiring work and yeah. And Kristen said the ad said the horse was in advanced years. Oh, that's a good close reading, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
maybe the horse wouldn't make it that far.
Right, exactly. Maybe it was the wrong horse to take. I also think about the fact that he is described so clearly in the ad that, and we don't know how broadly this ad was distributed, but, and I do want to find that out, but, his clothing is described so detailed that, and true, he probably was known in the area. And so is he going to be able to find shelter from someone? Or is his just kind of because people know him, is that going to be a detriment at this point? How can he change his appearance? Because not only his appearance, but his clothing was so well described in the ad as well.
And I love what you did, Elizabeth, by making this or suggesting constructing this as a challenge of individuals or teams. I think the teams would be particularly interesting
Yeah.
to assign, but to really watch. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in a
Yeah.
classroom watching groups of students, come up with a list of obstacles. So.
Right. 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 Exactly. So.
And Elizabeth, I think you said, but could you just re-say if you did say this, what were the ledgers that he grabbed from they were the sheriffs, you said?
Right, right. What Richard Littlepage described in the ad was that they were the ledgers of the business of the sheriff.
You want to go
So,
back? I can take you
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Yeah, so why do you think that he did that?
I think this was a case of opportunity. I think the horse was probably there. And
Okay.
it's almost, I mean, if we think about it, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but for people who, kind of steal a car and whatever the possessions are there sitting in the back seat, they also are there. But these were particularly perhaps important ledgers, or at least records that the sheriff was either using to keep track of something. Because it says the saddlebags contained two large books relative to the business of sheriff and a great number of papers, bonds, etc. There was also in the bags an elegant pair of steel barrel pistols fixed with a belt. So this is property that belonged to the sheriff. And, we think about that, go back to that whole bit of property again, who has ownership of certain things, who has, and it's interesting to me that the reward that Richard Littlepage is offering is he is offering $10 for the return of Isaac B., but he's offering $20 for the return of the horse and the saddlebags. And so we see then where value is also being placed on either a person or on the horse and what the horse's saddlebags contained. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Isaac B's story, we did one session of him in January 2024, I think, and so that YouTube recording is available. So there's a lot more to Isaac's story, and he's probably the one student we know the most about, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I wonder if you could toggle back to the timeline for Isaac B just for a quick second. One other activity that came to mind when we have this beautiful timeline, and we can share this slideshow, I think, alongside these webinars. But one cool thing with this would be to work backwards, I think, with students and have students either find if you have more advanced students, so maybe if you're working with APUS students, or if you're working with middle schoolers, you could provide the primary sources that a primary source that might go with each of these dates on the timeline and have students sort them. And that way you can show like how timelines are made using primary sources, but sort of work backwards. And I think, a lot of times we have students make timelines, but I think it would be really interesting for them to have to read the primary sources in order to infer how this timeline was created by a historian. I think that would be really fun and cool for them too.
And we do have a couple other timelines also on the website, one for Molly and one for Aggie. So for girls who may not be as interested perhaps in if they want to know about other people and not just Isaac B, we have a couple other a couple other options as well.
Yeah, other thoughts, or things that you came to mind when you were thinking about what obstacles Isaac B. might have encountered on his journey toward freedom. I think that one of the key things for me is thinking about, this line of he can read and write, It's almost like fair warning, he can read and write. Like it's like a warning to people, right? Because this is like this power that he has. And I think it's so interesting, that he's this educated man and that's part of his tagline. It's like, let me include this in here. Just be forewarned, everyone. He can read and write.
Right. And I will say in the 1774 ad, Lewis Burwell says he states that Isaac can read, but he doesn't know whether Isaac can write or not. But then by 1793, definitively, Richard Littlepage is sharing that Isaac can both read and write. And, it's interesting to think that, oh, could he have, we know that reading was taught at the Williamsburg Bray School. We know Isaac attended the Williamsburg Bray School. We don't know whether Isaac, had already been taught to read prior to walking in the doors of the Williamsburg Bray School, and whether that ability was enhanced by the instruction that he got there. But it is interesting to think about just the power of literacy, the power of that education that they are getting, not only at the Williamsburg Bray School, but also within their community as well. And certainly we have a separate project going on at the lab where we're really starting to look at literacy among enslaved people based on things like runaway ads that specifically state their ability to read and write, and then other primary sources that we're looking into as well.
Kristen is putting some awesome stuff in the chat. Kristen, you're welcome to unmute if you'd like, but you don't have
Please
to.
do.
I'm not gonna put you on the spot necessarily,
No,
but if
that's
you'd like
okay.
to,
I actually
yeah.
coincidentally had a conversation with Maureen and Elizabeth earlier today, and I didn't
Oh,
know that I
good.
would see them on the Zoom tonight. So hello again.
Hello.
Yeah, I really loved your comment of the reveal. I love that too, where you're putting together a series of documents and students are using those documents to try to make basically educated inferences about what they're reading and who they are reading about, right? And trying to build a story from that, just like historians do with their documents. I love that. And Kristen also asked, how does the timeline of the Bray School mesh with the laws against Black literacy in Virginia?
Maureen, do you want to take that one or?
Sure. Well, one of the interesting things is that the Bray School history unfolds at a time when there are not the barriers to education that we will see certainly after the American Revolution and increasingly going further and further into the 1800s. The rebellion, if you would call that, led by Nat Turner, um, 1830, 1831, that's a lightning rod to really clamp down on literacy. We're not there at the time of the Bray School. And in fact, because this is very much a religious education, right? It's a very, very Anglican, the word pious is used frequently in the correspondence, but a very religious education. It's carrying with it the ability to read and to spell and giving students the various tools that they can take themselves and use for their own purposes. Um, but it's very religious. And in fact, the teaching is designed to create more docile individuals who are enslaved. So it's really a curated education. It also speaks to the conviction held that it was important for the colonists to attend to the spiritual life of enslaved persons, whether that be through baptism, through this very Anglican education, through other means as well, attend to their spiritual lives and to this promise of freedom in heaven, not on this earth, but after death. So the ideas of education and enslavement are not working at they're not antithetical in the way that they are constructed, certainly afterwards. But even after, even well into the 1800s, there are pieces of evidence, there are primary documents, references that speak to the fact that literacy was still being taught, even when the laws were the most stringent, and running afoul of those laws were particularly dangerous for enslaved persons, for free people of color, for enslavers. Yet there was this continuation. And it's really the research that Elizabeth and our former historian Tanya Meredith did that kept surfacing these examples in their research, trying to find out what was happening to Isaac B., finding other evidence to suggest that this commitment to making enslaved persons literate, at least this basic ability to read, was a through line in the history of slavery in a way that we have not really understood in a broad sense. So by virtue of doing this mapping project, we hope to show that there was a broader, bigger, deeper history of African American education than is publicly, popularly known, and that we can point to instances, multiple instances across Virginia that show evidence of literacy among enslaved Virginians before the American Revolution and continuing after the American Revolution. Hope that helps.
I will say I like Kristen's comment about aligning with Anglicans and other Protestants in New England. We do know that there were two Bray schools, well, one in Newport, Rhode Island, and then one in New York City, as well as in Philadelphia, and then a second for Virginia in Fredericksburg. So I'd be curious to see that alignment between the Anglican Church in Rhode Island and then kind of how that spread after to the other denominations.
And those were the five, what we call the Bray schools.
Right.
And we call them the Bray schools collectively because they are funded by the Bray Associates in London. There's evidence, strong evidence to show that there were other less formal um, means by which enslaved persons were taught to read and potentially to write. So the Bray School can serve as kind of an anchor, or the Bray schools in Virginia, because we are focusing on Virginia. The Bray schools serve as anchors for this mapping project, but recognize that there are other ways, and we don't always know how someone became literate, even in the places where the Bray Associates desired to create other Bray schools. There might have been more Bray schools in Virginia had other parishes to whom books were sent and the promise of funding was shared. If they had said yes to that offer by the Bray Associates, there would have been more Bray schools. But in some cases where those schools were rejected, in some cases the books that were shipped ahead of time already to these sites were shared with other Blacks who could read, other enslaved persons who popularly were known to be able to read. So they did share them. We could imagine Book of Common Prayer, for example, which is a key book that was shipped. So we don't have to know exactly how that literacy was achieved. We don't know how that instruction was given. If we have a primary source that attests to the fact that an enslaved person in Virginia was able to at least read, then we can map that person. Isaac is interesting because we know Isaac B. went to the Bray School. If we did not know that he went to the Bray School, we could still map him based on the 1774 runaway ad, and that's shored up again by the 1793 where it says confirming that he can write as well.
So fascinating and really interesting too to see how Protestantism becomes a vehicle for literacy in many different avenues, like all throughout uh, early America and colonial America, among both free and enslaved Black populations.
And we know in different cases, literacy might not have been primarily a religious, um, I don't know how to say this properly. The case for literacy might not have been a religious one,
Hmm.
although there are certainly benefits, particularly a curated, very curated um, um, kind of religious education. But literacy could have some very simple, practical
Yeah.
benefits for someone in trades, for example, where the ability to read, have a good kind of basic ability to read was something that would be in the economic interest of the enslaver. So there's the religious component, but there are economic arguments to be made in different cases for literacy. The the question is where the boundaries of literacy are, where it's practical, where it's beneficial, and where it perhaps becomes that specter of being dangerous, right? Creating the idea of freedom, creating the idea of equality, or giving someone like Isaac B. the capacity to write his own pass and pass as a free person.
Yeah, like literacy could be a tool that could, potentially, like if you are an enslaver, enhance your property in some capacity, but it's not a tool that you can control, right?
Right.
Because you can't control their mind. So,
And that was that tightrope, right? That was that tension that we see in the correspondence where Robert Carter Nicholas is, um, he's lamenting to the Bray Associates that enslavers are not keeping the children in the Bray School for the 3 years that he um, really designed in terms of the functioning of the school, and presumably by his own correspondence also the 3 years that he modeled in terms of the children that he sent to the Bray School. And it's this specter that this was a dangerous proposition and had to be managed quite closely. And when enslavers felt that the children had enough education, they would be removed from the school. So we see the issue of turnover in the school. But in terms of the counting, so that again, that 300 to 400 students, any student who would have come to the school, whether it be for 2 weeks or 2 years, would be counted as a student. So we don't qualify based on how long they might have stayed.
Mm. All of this is so fascinating. Are there any other questions before we sort of get ready to wrap up? I'm getting sad that this is our last webinar together. I think we'll have to have some more, maybe in the spring.
So, but as a recap, we just want to say, again, we know that this is hard history and so much respect for our teachers. We know teachers do an amazing job in the classroom every day. So we're here to help. We're here to offer information, support, whatever you would like. This is hard history in the sense that it's again with this student demographic, it's more theoretical, more critical thinking. So it's hard history in terms of the content, in terms of thinking, and just the sheer volume. I can't imagine the volume of preparation that teachers put into to the work that they do each day in the classroom, and the volume of material that has to be covered. So we are here to help. And again, in the slides, you have our contact information, but we want to say thank you for being part of this partnership. Thank you to you, Sam, from the very beginning, being excited about partnering with us, with the VCSS, and to all our teachers. Braylab at wm.edu is our email address, and you can always just Google. Just
Yeah.
Bray School Lab, come right to us. And again, as always, I need to acknowledge our partners at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation who are world class, right? We know they are world class. We've seen this in the restoration of the Bray School building, their teacher institutes, their online digital assets as well. Let me just do one plug again. One of the major books that was used at the Bray School was A Child's First Book, and it is a small book that was used to teach basic vowels and consonants, phonetic sounds, building simple words into simple sentences. And then by the end of that little book, you have morning prayers and evening prayers and some basic principles of Anglican catechism. That book is available on the Colonial Williamsburg website. If you just put Child's First Book, Colonial Williamsburg, it's a PDF, and you can literally go page by page on the screen and see the book that the children would have used at the Bray School. CW tracked a copy of that book to an archive in Germany. They replicated it in Williamsburg using colonial printing practices, and it's amazing discovery story. And it's just part of the commitment, collective commitment to telling the story of the Williamsburg Bray School.
Well, Maureen and Elizabeth, thank you so much for this incredible webinar series and the amazing amount of both information and ideas that you've brought to the table. I think that the best way to teach hard history is to, one, connect it to local history, and then to lean into primary sources and reliable partners. And I think that you have done those three things, right? You are our reliable partner. You've given us tons of primary sources to connect this to. And the Bray School, the Williamsburg Bray School, is such a rich piece of history that we can connect students to and really help them learn more about Virginia. So I appreciate you both so much. And if any of you ever want to reach out, again, these are the contact information for the Bray School Lab. And you can also reach me at sfutrell@wm.edu. And I just want to thank you all for joining us for this series. And we appreciate you so much and all of the work that you do in the classroom for our students. And we hope that we'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank
Thank
you. Take
you. Have a good
care.
night.
Take care.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.